We're about to get another beautiful example of how Arch is always right. You know how I talked about for quite some time now that we would see, especially around Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, an ever-increasing amount of left-wing and progressive sites and pundits attempting to claim things that they themselves rejected years earlier? Well, we are now beginning that in D&D with Dark Sun. I love that D&D is returning to Dark Sun, but the backlash will be unbearable, writes Wargamer, a very, very progressive site. Now, Dark Sun of D&D is Dungeons & Dragons, but not fantasy. It is an alternative universe, in essence, which is post-apocalyptic. Think more Mad Max with a handful of wizard kings than I think a singular dragon, and so on. And it was a setting that was cancelled by the progressives years ago for being problematic. Indeed, we even got articles from the same site going, Wizard says D&D Dark Sun is too problematic to return. There are loads of these articles, and the reason why was because it had slaves in them. That's why. And it wasn't even that they were portrayed positively. It wasn't that Dark Sun was like, yay, slavery is the best thing ever. It was simply that it had slaves at all, and that it was a fairly central part of the setting. Slave empires and city-states and so on. As they put it here, I don't think slavery was ever presented as being an institution that was anything but evil in Dark Sun, but it was presented as being existent. I think that can run into problems when you're trying to run a campaign. You don't have the ability to put your mind and your sensibilities into the heart of every DM who's running it. So there's certainly the potential for somebody to misuse certain thematic aspects of it. The reason why Dark Sun was cancelled years and years ago was because somebody out there could potentially show slavery in something other than the worst possible light, other than the most demonic, the most evil, and thus even having the potential for it was an issue. This was, of course, during the heights of political influence on D&D, like 2021, etc., when Dungeons & Dragons, which had been fully conquered at the time, were bending the knee as hard as they conceivably could. They were cracking the ground beneath their knee time and time again, trying to drive themselves into the dirt, as the progressive movement found further and more ridiculous demands to put to them in order to continue to extend their influence. Now that the tide has begun to turn somewhat, and companies are beginning to look for, customers again, rather than political interest groups, there is a shift in the narrative. Now, Dark Sun is no longer too problematic. Now, it is left-wing. Now it's a good thing. As we go down a little bit in the article here, I want to read these two paragraphs to you. The thing that makes the world of Athos and the Dark Sun setting so distinctive and so compelling are inherently political. Remember how I talked about again and again, the means through which the left conquers a setting. If they can't cancel it, and they did in this case, but now it's coming back, if they can't get rid of it for good, they need to colonize it, they need to take it over. And the first step is always to make it political, so that they can then move on to interpret it. And that makes them divisive. Athos' desert world, where the lonely bastions of civilization are the city-states, each one ruled by a tyrannical sorcerer king. Their defiling magic has drained the life of Athos and caused its current environmental collapse. Not actually entirely correct according to the law, but if I correct these people on lore every time, and hell, even I am somewhat of a tourist in D&D, so let's just say that's somewhat misleading, but... And the rule is propped up by both military power and pervasive slavery. Classic Dark Sun adventure tells stories of slave revolts and the liberation of one of the city-states. Well, again, there is one tale of a successful slave revolt, and it wasn't so much the slaves as a group of heroes, but again, let's not nitpick the lore inconsistencies of wannabe fans of a thing. That's not subtle politics. The Sorcerer Kings are simple metaphors for oligarchs, billionaires, and industrialists, and the devastating impact of the environment that is necessary to support them. The desertification in Athens is literal climate change. The slave revolts are stories of collective solidarity between the oppressed. It's green, it's socialist, it's very left-wing. And now we come to the second point. Once you've declared something to be political, you can then go, this is political, and it just so happens to be my politics. Who could possibly have imagined that? And because it's my politics, it is the third step, explicitly socialist, left-wing, progressive. Even if, by this logic, we could easily apply the exact opposite, or, well, the socialism of the other side, shall we say. Okay, what happened? Well, we've got a society ran by elites, where the 1% rule over all of the news medias and the power structures, etc. The little hat people have taken complete control. The devastation around them? Well, that's definitely a metaphor for Gaza, isn't it? And the destruction required to maintain the small hat society. And the heroes fighting against them? Well, the Palestinians are the rebels and the raiders outside the cities. We shall halt the example there, but my point is, it is very, 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 very easy to simply just enforce your own fantasies upon these things, which is exactly what is happening here. First, they cancelled it because they had the power to do so. Now that the left is beginning to understand that its power is waning, it is moving to claim it. And due to the beautiful year zero nature of progressivism, the cancellation never happened. That was other people. Those were the bad progressives. Oh, they were the wokest. No, we always liked Dark Sun. It was always really great, and I'd love for it to return. By the way, did you know that it's inherently socialist and environmentalist as well? Again, I talked about this mostly surrounding the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 thing, where the left will claim things, no matter how hostile the terrain is, they will make an attempt. They will try. Even in this case, something they themselves took out behind the shed and tried their damnedest to put down, without so much of a shadow of shame or doubt, they will swoop on in and goes, you know, the very politics that destroyed this, it's actually the heroes all along. You just gotta interpret it through a certain lens. Yes, indeed. This is something that we need to get a lot better at as well, as the only way to even begin to work against this is to, firstly, laugh the argument out of the room and then go, no, it's not that at all. It is actually the exact opposite. Or, if you don't want to be quite so spicy, simply argue that it's every single fucking fantasy setting ever. There is a nebulous evil up in a great tower. You know, classic Tolkien-esque nonsense. The original groundswelling from which D&D came in its entirety. We, the heroes, are now going to work against that great evil. And the fact that it's taking place in a society that has slaves, well, simply allows us a different way to do it. It doesn't have to be political, and you must therefore be eager and able to argue that as well. Argue either that it is political but in the opposite, or argue that it is apolitical in that it has nothing to do with socialism. Again, it is a player-crafted adventure. If they want to be the communist revolutionaries rising up against the oligarch overlords, okay, you know what? That's fine as well, so long as you don't try to make that the story of the setting, which is exactly what is attempted to be done here. Exactly the same as my alternative retelling could be presented by a different group, or a third group could ignore the slaves entirely and simply seek to supplant themselves at the top of society instead of the Sorcerer King ruling over the city-state. A fourth group might go out into the wilderness and join the bandits preying upon the pockets of civilization, etc. Because that is the point of role-playing. But this is more so simply an example to point out, again, Arch was right, and you've got to keep your eyes open for this, as we're going to be seeing a lot more of it. This is going to start happening in all forms of entertainment and media, where you're going to see individuals with very progressive-leaning politics and very progressive-leaning ties suddenly going, yes, no, I was always a real fan of this particular setting, you see, and it's a very left-wing setting. Let me tell you why. At which point you need to remind them of the very time that they tried to destroy that self-same thing. Battle's not quite over yet, gentlemen, but at least we are on the right path. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. And have a good day.